Good day, dear students. Today our lection is devoted to the theme theories of truth. And let's begin with the concept of truth. Truth is a category of philosophy and culture that denotes the ideal knowledge and the way to achieve it, or justification of the truth. This is a value theoretical concept that presupposes, on the one hand, the reflexive constructive development of the criteria for the perfection and improvement of knowledge, and on the other hand, it refers to a value system in which the ideal of a given perfection is determined contextually through connections with other value categories. Let's consider the first theory of truth, classical theory of truth, or correspondence theory of truth. The general characteristics of the correspondence theory of truth. In the classical theory of truth, the truth is understood as the correspondence of human knowledge to the real state of affairs, some kind of objective reality. In explicit form, the classical concept can be found already in the doctrines of Plato and Aristotle. The correspondence of knowledge or ideas to reality can be understood in two ways, depending on how to interpret this objective reality itself. Correspondence of human thought to material reality, as in the doctrine of Aristotle, or correspondence of human thought, that is, subjective mental understanding, to the ideal being of eternal ideas, that is, to an objectively mental being, as we see in the doctrine of Plato. The co-presence of two aspects of correspondence. Whatever general metaphysical epistemological attitude we take, realistic or Platonic, within the framework of the classical understanding of truth, both aspects of correspondence will certainly be present. In the case of a realistic and even materialistic position, there will still be a moment for human knowledge to correspond to some objective ideal entity. For example, the proposition classical mechanics is a scientific theory is true because Newton's classical mechanics meets all the characteristics of an ideal construct called theory. On the other hand, in the Platonic version of the theory of correspondence, the judgment, the name of a given person is Socrates, is a true statement of the state of affairs in the material world. The connection of ontological and epistemological understanding of truth in Platonic theories. Platonic theories of correspondence can merge with the ontological understanding of truth as a genuine spiritual ideal being, which can be directly contemplated and experienced by a person. Realistic versions of the classical approach to the truth can come closer to its ontological interpretation in the sense of the lawful or idealistic existence of any phenomenon or subject or object. Difficulties in the correspondence theory of truth. The classical concept has always been and still remains the most influential, not only among philosophers but also among scientists, for it is most consistent with their intuitive belief that they do not create scientific hypotheses and theories at their own choice, but learn something that is existing, and that the knowledge they received is not a fiction but reveals the objective laws of the universe. However, there are a number of problems in the correspondence theory of truth, especially if we understand the objective reality, by the objective reality, the material level of being. To be able to compare our knowledge with reality, we must be sure of the absolute reliability, or, as it can be said, authenticity of this reality. But this is precisely what we do not have. Why? Because we compare our knowledge with not with the reality itself, but with its perception, facts that can be designated as the world of experience. But these facts cannot be independent of our cognitive abilities, as well as the world of knowledge itself. Thus, we never deal with the reality in itself, but always with its sensual or rationally structured image. The world is, as it were, subjectively ordered in advance by us, even before we began to check the truth of knowledge for compliance with it, for correspondence with it. If we are dealing with testing a theory for its correspondence to fact, then the fact of science is always a primary selected and conceptually formed by our mind's formation. Therefore, it is necessary to clarify the very concept of correspondence. The process of cognition is a complex subject-object relationship. Consequently, the relationship between thoughts and reality cannot be a simple comparison of two components independent of each other, already due to the fact that the bearer of thought is itself a part of reality of being. Thoughts is not a mirror image of being, but a special ideal formation in which the subjective principle and objective reality are closely intertwined. Accordingly, the linguistic expression of this situation is variability and dependence on social cultural circumstances are just as difficult. The establishment of epistemological restrictions is a condition for the fulfillment of the principle of correspondence. Because the principle of correspondence can be carried out only with significant epistemological restrictions, which is carried out in specific sciences. Sciences describe objects that sometimes simply have nothing too much in the real world. Therefore, the construction of the criteria of truth is realized here at an ideal level, which leads to a number of paradoxes. One of the most famous examples of this kind is the liar paradox, where the liar's judgment, I am a lion, cannot be unequivocally assessed as true or false. Full implementation of the principle of correspondence, and this is the main characteristic of classical truth, is feasible only in relation to artificial languages, which are obviously significantly poorer than natural languages. As a result, the classical theory of truth, despite the external complexity of its understanding and convincing reliability, is based on an extended version of everyday ideas, where it all comes down to an empirical test, which leads to significant difficulties when such tests cannot be performed. In the classical theory of truth, the constructive activity of the subject of cognition is underestimated, which is precisely what the a prioristic theory of truth emphasizes. Let's consider the a prioristic theory of truth. And let's start with examples of a prioristic theories of truth in philosophy, in ancient philosophy. This theory is based on the belief that the truth or a number of truths are originally inherent in a person or human soul in the form of some pre-experience knowledge that can be revealed in each individual thought, a certain method, as if helping a person to remember what was originally in his or her consciousness. This is the doctrine of the Indian Vedanta about the potential omniscience of the human Atman, which is identical with Brahman. The ancient understanding of knowledge as a recollection, in Greek anamnesis, of what the immortal soul once saw and heard. The Christian doctrine of the potential godlikeness of man, the Cartesian doctrine of innate ideas with the thesis that everything is true, that men perceive clearly and distinctly, etc. And let's consider Immanuel Kant's a prioristic theory of truth and the concept of a posteriori knowledge. Kant was the most consistent, give the most consistent version of the a priori understanding of truth. He distinguishes two types of cognition: pure knowledge and empirical knowledge. Empirical knowledge appears as a kind of beginning of knowledge, but it is not reducible to it. It stimulates the development of human cognitive abilities, which are then able to bring something new into the process of cognition. Knowledge based on experience is realized in the form of a set of a posteriori judgments that form a posteriori knowledge. The content of such judgments is based on sensory material. The truth of such judgments depends on direct correspondence with reality. Let's consider the concept a priori knowledge. A priori knowledge is a set of a priori judgments, which, unlike a posteriori knowledge, do not depend on experience. Only such knowledge has the signs of necessity, universality, and clear evidence. A priori judgments are valid. A priori knowledge, like the truth of reason, is necessary, and a posteriori knowledge, like the truths of fact, has a random character. Therefore, it is a priori knowledge that should give to scientific positions a reliable character. And now we consider two kinds of judgments: analytic and synthetic judgments. Analytic judgments provide the form to our knowledge, giving it consistency and harmony. This is an inferenced part of knowledge that does not add new content to it. In analytic judgments, the predicate already contained in the concept of the subject and vaguely conceived in it this predicate is explicated from this concept according to the law of identity. Although analytic judgments do not expand our knowledge, they nevertheless expand the sphere of the distinctly conceivable. In this psychological moment, there is the main difference between analytic judgments and meaningless tautologies. Being based on the immutable law of identity, all analytic judgments are a priori judgments. Strict necessity is interpreted by Kant as one of the criteria of a priori knowledge. The second kind of judgments is synthetic judgments, which are on the contrary able to carry new meaningful information. In synthetic judgments, the predicate from the outside is added to the subject. Expanding our knowledge, synthetic judgments are the true purpose of all sciences. And now let's consider some examples of analytical judgments. All bodies are extended. All gold is yellow. All my ideas are united in I. Kant's explanations make it possible to link analytical judgments with explications of the rules of word use. The judgment gold is yellow, it is, in this context, has the following meaning. A necessary condition for naming an object gold is that the given object has a yellow color. If this judgment is interpreted as synthetic, the possibility of which Kant does not exclude in principle, then it will mean that any object with such and such properties, i.e. gold, also has a yellow color. In metaphysics, as in other sciences, analytic judgments play a service role, clarifying the basic concepts. And let's consider example of synthetic judgments. All bodies are heavy. Every change has a reason. 7 plus 5 equals 12. Kant also classifies all existential judgments as synthetic, for no concept contains a predicate of existence. The nominal definition of synthetic judgments, however, does not give an adequate idea of the Kantian concept. Kant is only interested in true synthetic judgments. that is synthetic knowledge. The truth of synthetic judgments cannot be given by their formal structure, as in the case of analytic judgments. Therefore, it depends on the relationship of the object, of the subject, and the predicate to some external X, which must confirm the correctness of their connection. Thus, all synthetic judgments are judgments about things, while analytic judgment about words. Two types of synthetic judgments. With regard to synthetic judgments, two cases are possible. The first case, that the connection between the subject and the predicate is prompted by the available objects, as in the thesis all bodies have a weight. Then we are dealing with empirical synthetic judgments. Their universality can be exclusively inductive. And the second case, when the connection between the subject and the predicate is verified due to the fact that the formal structure formed by it reflects the necessary conditions of the very givenness of the objects of sense in experience, which are in the soul, so that these objects must certainly correspond to what is thought in such a judgment. For example, Kant proves that it is possible to know a priori that every change has a cause, precisely because the subordination of the sequence of events to the law of causality is a necessary condition for us to perceive this sequence. These are synthetic judgments a priori. They have strict universality and necessity. As a result of this consideration, Kant sees the specificity of philosophy in the fact that it should act precisely as a general theory of knowledge, which substantiates a priori synthetic judgments. Kant in his theory of knowledge fixes the active role of the subject of cognition, since only when a person focuses his attention on some object, the latter becomes an object of cognition. But at the same time, the subject is indifferent to the person and exists by itself. Therefore, a kind of epistemological contradiction arises. A person cognizes a certain object, but only in that part of it that his inner cognitive abilities are capable of. That is, cognition is possible when the thing becomes an object of sensory contemplation. There are two kinds of things, noumena and phenomena. A thing that has become an object of sensory contemplation is essentially transcendental. It seems to acquire new properties that were not yet present in an object indifferent to consciousness. And it is these new properties that represent what we call objective reality. Objective reality is manifested for us due to our cognitive activity. Thus, any subject of cognition is bifurcated into a thing for us, or phenomenon, and thing in itself, or noumenon. So the world doubles in the world of things in themselves and the world of things for us. The totality of phenomena constitutes the sensually perceived world, the world of things for us, and the totality of things in themselves is the world not perceived by the senses, or the world of things in themselves. Each of these worlds is not only given to our consciousness in a different way, but also has a different cognitive meaning. According to such view, a person is not able to perceive the world as it is. This is Kantian agnosticism. But he or she is able to know it as such, which his or her cognitive abilities allow him to do. Therefore, when they talk about the agnosticism of Kant's concept, it should be clarified that Kant's position, is not so much a doubt in knowledge as an indication of the active role of the subject of knowledge, because the degree of person's knowledge of the world depends on his or this activity. And let's consider some arguments against a prioristic theory of Immanuel Kant. In spite of all the originality and non-classicality of Kant's line of thought, it soon became clear that those principles that Kant considered pre-experienced and universally true are not such, at least outside the boundaries of Newtonian classical mechanics. As for the references to a priori, then the most important epistemological problem lies in confirming the truth of the initial pre-experimental premises of any scientific and philosophical theory. All subsequent developments in the theory of truth, especially revived at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries in connection with the crisis in natural science, set themselves the task of avoiding, on the one hand, naive references to objective reality, as it is in classical theories, and on the other hand, indications of various kinds of pre-experienced structures inherent in the a priori approach. Thank you for your attention.